elementary school teacher was linked to the death of her partner. The man did not disappear, but was buried in the back garden of their own home. For 4 months, messages were sent as if he were still alive, and no one suspected anything until the police found the diary. Moore Street, Northampton, is a quiet street like many other residential areas in England. Terraced houses, small back gardens, neighbours who recognise one another, and rarely anything unusual ever happens. Fiona Beal lived in one of the houses on this street. She was a Year 6 primary school teacher, described by colleagues and parents as gentle, dedicated and trustworthy. Living with Beal was Nicholas Billingham, 42, a builder. They had lived together for nearly 17 years, long enough to be considered a familiar couple in the eyes of their neighbours. There was no police history, no loud arguments, and no signs to suggest that a tragedy was approaching. And it was precisely this sense of normality that later made the case so disturbing, because for many months, no one on Moore Street knew that inside that seemingly peaceful home, a serious crime had taken place and had been concealed beneath the back garden. Fiona Beal and Nicholas Billingham lived together for nearly 17 years. To those around them, they appeared to be a long-term, familiar couple, not particularly noticeable and rarely drawing attention. But inside the house, their relationship was becoming increasingly strained. Nicholas Billingham was unfaithful multiple times throughout their relationship and had a child with another woman. These events made an already fragile relationship even more unstable. Fiona Beal felt betrayed, trapped, and gradually lost her sense of control over her own life. Beal said that Billingham frequently controlled and exerted psychological pressure over her, including controlling finances and behaviors within their intimate relationship that she described as coercive. She also stated that she was often insulted and made to feel diminished. These experiences, according to Beal, accumulated over many years and had a serious impact on her mental health. In her personal writings, Beal began to refer to an alter ego she called Tulip 22. This was another version of herself, colder, more reckless, and no longer afraid of consequences. According to Beal's description, this psychological state gradually took over, while her relationship with Billingham continued to slide deeper into a dead end. As October 2021 began, the atmosphere inside the house on Moore Street became heavier than ever. Tensions that had built up over many years were no longer masked by everyday silence. In her personal writings, Beal described feeling cornered, with no clear way out of a relationship that had lasted nearly 2 decades. During this period, Beal began writing in her diary more frequently. The entries revealed an unstable state of mind, mixed with anger, despair, and increasingly extreme thoughts. No longer limited to complaints or self-reassurance, the writings gradually shifted towards imagining a different ending for the relationship, one that involved a complete and final conclusion. An incident around Halloween in 2021 was described by Beal as the final straw. Although specific details were not publicly disclosed, Miss Beal believed this moment caused all remaining boundaries to collapse. From that point on, thoughts of killing Nicholas Billingham no longer appeared fleetingly, but became a clearly formed intention in her mind. The diary shows that this process unfolded gradually. The idea did not arise in a sudden burst of anger, but was nurtured over many days and nights, as Beal convinced herself that there was only one path to escape a relationship she believed had reached a dead end. On the evening of November 1st, 2021, everything unfolded inside the very house where Fiona Beal and Nicholas Billingham had lived together for nearly 17 years. There were no outward signs of anything unusual, no loud arguments, nothing to draw the attention of neighbors. Earlier, Beal had prepared a knife and a cable. These items were not present by chance. They reflected an intention that had already been formed rather than an impulsive act in the moment. Nicholas Billingham was not on his guard. He was in a vulnerable situation, with no indication that he was facing danger. There was no major struggle or fierce resistance inside the house that evening. In his final moments, Billingham is said to have asked a brief question. Why? It was his last question. Nicholas Billingham died inside the very home he had called his own for many years. And from that moment on, Moore Street was no longer an ordinary street, even though it would take many months for that truth to be revealed. After Nicholas Billingham died, Fiona Beal did not call for emergency help. She did not contact the police, nor did she seek assistance from anyone. Instead, Beal began to act in an organized and calm manner. She tied Billingham's body, then dragged it into the back garden of the house. Everything took place in a familiar space that, for many years, had been used only for ordinary daily activities. Now that garden became a place where the truth was concealed. Beal dug a hole and buried the body, using a tarpaulin, construction waste, and concrete to cover it. This method made the burial site appear like a pile of ordinary debris, unlikely to attract attention. From the outside, there were no signs that beneath those materials lay the body of a man. Afterwards, Beal returned inside the house and cleaned the scene. Then any traces that might raise suspicion were removed. The house was gradually restored to a tidy, familiar state, as if nothing serious had just occurred. It was this calm, calculated behavior that became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case, because from that point on, the crime lay not only in the act of killing, but also in the way it was quietly concealed within the space of everyday life. In the weeks and months that followed, Fiona Beal continued her life as if nothing unusual had happened. She returned to school, continued teaching, and appeared before colleagues and pupils with the familiar image of an ordinary primary school teacher. At the same time, Beal began sending fake messages from Nicholas Billingham's phone. At first, the messages claimed that they both had COVID and needed to self-isolate. Later, the story changed. Billingham was said to have left to begin a new relationship. The messages were brief, written in a familiar tone, and convincing enough to make family and friends believe that he was still alive and simply did not wish to stay in contact. Billingham's family accepted these explanations. No missing person report was filed, and no search was initiated during that period. At Christmas, 2021, Nicholas Billingham's mother visited the house on Moore Street. She sat and talked with Beal in the familiar living space, unaware that her son's body was buried in the back garden, just a few meters away. In her diary, Beal recorded scattered thoughts about life after Billingham's disappearance. One short but chilling sentence stood out among the entries. "Moving a body is much more difficult than it looks on TV." That line reflected a disturbing emotional detachment between the act that had taken place and the life Beal continued to maintain. A life that on the surface still appeared completely normal. By early 2022, Fiona Beal's mental state began to fracture. After months of maintaining a seemingly normal life, what she had been concealing no longer appeared to be under control. Beal left Northampton and rented a remote lodge in Cumbria, distancing herself from her familiar surroundings and the people around her. During her time there, Beal engaged in self-harm, but did not succeed. The incident caused concern among her relatives, who contacted the police to request a welfare check. When officers attended the lodge, they found no signs of a crime at the scene, but they did discover something far more significant. Beal's personal diaries. The contents of the diaries quickly alarmed the police. The entries not only revealed psychological instability, but also described in detail what had taken place in the house on Moore Street. These writings showed that Nicholas Billingham had not left, as suggested by the earlier messages, but had died many months before. From this point onward, the story of a man who had suddenly lost contact began to take a different direction. What was written in the diaries forced the police to return to Northampton, a place that, until then, had been regarded as a completely peaceful street. Based on what was recorded in the diary, police quickly returned to Moore Street, Northampton. The street that had once been regarded as peaceful now became the focus of the investigation. Attention turned to the back garden of the house where Fiona Beal and Nicholas Billingham had lived together. When the garden was excavated, the truth was finally revealed. The body of Nicholas Billingham was found there, buried beneath layers of material that from the outside looked no different from ordinary construction waste. The man who was believed to have left months earlier had, in fact, never left the house at all. From that moment, the story of a man who had suddenly lost contact was officially confirmed as a murder case. The fake messages, the earlier explanations, and the months of silence all collapsed in the face of undeniable evidence. Fiona Beal was arrested in 2022. Due to a severe deterioration in her mental health, she was taken for treatment under the Mental Health Act before the criminal investigation and prosecution continued. With the discovery of the body, the case entered a new stage, no longer a suspicion but a truth that had been fully exposed. After Fiona Beal was arrested, the case entered a long and complex legal process. It took considerable time for the authorities to complete the investigation, assess Beal's mental state, and prepare the case for prosecution. In 2023, the first trial was held at Northampton Crown Court. The proceedings lasted 64 days, during which extensive testimony and evidence were presented. However, due to legal issues that arose during the process, the trial was discontinued and the case had to be retried. This left the victim's family in a continued state of uncertainty and waiting. In 2024, the case was retried at the Old Bailey in London. In the early stages, Fiona Beal pleaded guilty to manslaughter, claiming that her actions occurred during a loss of control. However, during the course of the proceedings, this position changed. Beal later pleaded guilty to murder, admitting to an intentional killing. The prosecution emphasized that this was not an impulsive act. According to their argument, the case displayed all the elements of a planned crime. Beal had prepared in advance, concealed the body for an extended period, constructed false narratives to mislead others, and continued to live as normal after the victim's death. These factors, the prosecution argued, demonstrated that this was not a case of loss of control, but an act carried out with clear calculation. With Beal's guilty plea to murder, the case moved closer to its legal conclusion, although the pain experienced by the victim's family could not be brought to an end so quickly. On 30 May 2024, after a legal process that had lasted several years, Fiona Beal was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 20 years before she can be considered for parole. The sentence brought the legal journey of the case to an end, but could not fully ease the losses endured by the victim's family. In delivering the verdict, the judge highlighted several aggravating factors, including the premeditated nature of the act, the prolonged concealment over many months, and the particularly severe impact on the family of Nicholas Billingham. At the same time, the court acknowledged certain mitigating factors related to Beal's mental health and the context of a long-term relationship, although these did not alter the fundamental nature of the offense. In court, members of the victim's family gave deeply painful statements. They spoke of feelings of betrayal, of a long period of waiting in vain, and of a loss that could not be measured or resolved by any sentence. By 2026, the case once again drew widespread public attention when ITV broadcast the documentary Killer in the House, The Murder of Nicholas Billingham. The program not only retraced the events of the case, but also portrayed a crime hidden in the midst of everyday life, something that left many viewers deeply unsettled. From then on, the Fiona Beal case became a chilling symbol of the concept of the killer next door, crimes that do not come from strangers, but from those who appear most familiar and trustworthy. It also reignited ongoing debates about violence in intimate relationships, about the boundary between victim and perpetrator, and about how society views stories that unfold behind closed doors. And as the story comes to an end, one haunting question remains with the audience. If it were not for that diary, would the truth ever have been known? This case is not only a story about a crime, but also a chilling reminder of what can take place behind doors that appear peaceful. A prolonged toxic relationship, if not recognized and addressed in time, can lead to irreversible consequences. At the same time, the case shows that those who commit crimes do not always appear suspicious. Sometimes danger comes from the people who seem most familiar. Recognizing warning signs early, seeking support, and not allowing silence to persist. These may be the fragile line between tragedy and timely intervention.